The year is 1837. The world is changing. Machines roar to life. Smoke rises from the factories and a new empire begins to shape the destiny of humankind. A young queen steps onto the throne, Victoria, unaware that her name will define an era. An age of power, progress, and pride. Before the dawn of the Victorian Age, the world stood at the edge of transformation. The 18th century had already sparked the first fires of change, but now, as the 19th century unfolded, those flames were about to engulf the globe in a revolution unlike any before it. The air was thick with smoke, steam, and ambition. Cities were growing, machines were humming, and the heartbeat of progress echoed through the factories of Britain. It was a time when the old order was fading. The age of kings and castles was giving way to an age of factories and ideas. Feudal systems and aristocratic privilege were being challenged by a new class of thinkers, inventors, and dreamers. The world was beginning to move faster. Trains thundered across the countryside, ships sliced through oceans powered not by sails, but by steam. Humanity was learning to harness the forces of nature itself. In the heart of this storm stood Britain, a small island nation whose power and influence stretched across continents. Its navy ruled the seas, its merchants traded across the world, and its factories produced goods that reached every corner of the empire. Yet this dominance had not come overnight. It was built through centuries of exploration, conquest, and invention. The British Empire was no accident. It was the result of a relentless drive to expand, innovate, and dominate. When Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, she inherited a nation on the verge of greatness. The world she entered was not one of comfort but of contrast. Immense wealth existed beside unbearable poverty. In the glittering streets of London, the gas lamps illuminated both luxury and despair. The rich dined in marble halls, while the poor toiled in factories, their hands blackened by coal dust, their lungs filled with smoke. Yet even in this darkness, hope flickered, because the same engines that produced hardship also powered progress. The Industrial Revolution was more than an era of machines. It was an age of mindsets. It demanded discipline, precision, and courage. Inventions like the steam engine, the telegraph, and the spinning jenny transformed not just industry, but identity. People began to believe that the world could be shaped, molded, improved. Science replaced superstition, invention replaced tradition, and ambition replaced complacency. For the first time, humanity felt it could take command of its own destiny. The Victorian world was built upon this belief, that progress was not just possible, but inevitable. Every invention was a promise of a better tomorrow. Every discovery was a victory of reason over chaos. The men and women of this age looked to the future with unshakable faith that hard work and innovation could conquer any obstacle. This belief was the true power of Britain, more powerful than armies, more enduring than empires. Across the empire, British influence spread like wildfire. Railroads stretched across India, telegraph lines connected continents, and British ships carried goods, soldiers, and ideas to every shore. The Union Jack waved over 1/4 of the world's population. The empire was not just political. It was cultural, scientific, and industrial. English became the language of progress. British laws and institutions laid the foundations of modern governance. The empire's reach reshaped economies, societies, and even dreams. But behind the glory lay contradiction. For every palace there was a slum. For every noble invention, there was a cost paid in human lives. Children worked long hours in dangerous conditions. Families lived in crowded tenements. Disease spread through the cities faster than medicine could catch it. Progress demanded a price, and the Victorian Age paid it in sweat, suffering, and sacrifice. Yet despite the struggle, there was pride, a sense of mission that drove people forward. The Victorians believed that they were living in a time chosen by destiny, that their empire, their inventions, their ideas were shaping the very course of civilization. And in many ways, they were right. The modern world, From electricity to transportation, from education to architecture, was born from the ambitions of that age. In the streets of London, one could feel history being written. Horse-drawn carriages rolled past newly built rail stations. The clatter of iron wheels mixed with the whistle of steam engines. Inventors, writers and scientists met in coffee houses to debate ideas that would redefine the future. The works of Dickens, Darwin and Brunel became symbols of a civilization that refused to stand still. London became the heart of a global network, a place where power, intellect and vision converged. It was also a time of great reform. As the empire grew, so did the conscience of the people. Movements for workers' rights, women's suffrage and education began to rise. Humanitarian voices spoke out against injustice, pushing the nation towards social progress. The Victorian spirit was not only about invention and empire, it was about moral responsibility. The belief that greatness demanded virtue as well as vision. To live in the Victorian age was to witness the world being reborn. Every day brought new wonders. Bridges that spanned rivers once thought impossible to cross. Ships that traveled faster than the wind. Lights that turned night into day. Science unlocked secrets of life and matter. Medicine began to save lives that once would have been lost. Communication and travel shrank the globe, making distant lands feel close. Humanity had entered an age of endless possibility, and through it all, the image of Queen Victoria stood as a symbol of stability, of empire, of endurance. Her reign became the mirror of her nation's spirit, proud, determined and unstoppable. Under her watch, Britain became not only a power, but a model, an example of what discipline, innovation and unity could achieve. But history is never simple. The same age that built factories also built empires on the backs of the colonized. The same ambition that created progress also justified domination. The Victorian Age was both magnificent and flawed, a time of light and shadow, glory and guilt. It revealed both the greatness and the greed of human nature. Still, as the smoke rose from the chimneys and the railways carved their paths across continents, one truth remained. This was an era of creation, an age when human hands reshaped the planet, when the world learned to dream in steel and steam. The Victorian Age was not just a chapter in history, it was the foundation of the modern world. When Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, she was only 18 years old, young, uncertain, yet destined to rule an empire that stretched across the globe. Few could have imagined that this quiet, determined woman would reign for over 60 years, becoming a symbol of stability in a world racing toward change. Her crown was not merely gold, it was forged in iron, steam, and ambition. Britain stood at the dawn of an industrial awakening. Factories rose like fortresses across the landscape, their chimneys painting the sky with the smoke of progress. The rhythmic pounding of machinery echoed through every city, Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, each becoming a temple of innovation. Trains roared across the countryside, carrying goods, ideas and people faster than ever before. Coal, steel and steam became the lifeblood of the empire. This was the age when men like Isambard Kingdom Brunel dreamed in metal and fire. His bridges spanned rivers that once divided nations. His ships conquered oceans once thought impassable. The Victorian Age was not built by kings. It was built by engineers, inventors, and ordinary workers who believed that human will could bend the laws of nature. London, the beating heart of the empire, grew into the world's largest city, a maze of wealth and poverty, elegance and exhaustion. The gas lights along its streets illuminated not just progress, but paradox. Carriages rolled past slums. Music halls stood beside sweatshops. The empire was vast and powerful, but beneath its polished surface lay the struggles of the working class who kept its engines running. Factories produced textiles, iron and machinery that transformed the world's economy. Ships sailed from British ports carrying goods to Asia, Africa and the Americas, and returning with resources that fueled the empire's hunger for growth. Britain became the workshop of the world, and its empire, the marketplace. Trade routes stretched across every ocean, guarded by the most powerful navy in history. The Royal Navy was not just a military force, it was a symbol of Britain's global reach, ensuring that the sun truly never set on the British Empire. But power brought responsibility, and empire brought contradiction. The same nation that championed progress also ruled over millions who had no voice in their own governance. The Victorian conscience wrestled with this reality. Reformers and visionaries emerged, men and women who sought to balance progress with principle. They fought for workers' rights, child labor laws, education, and the abolition of slavery. The Victorian Age was not just an age of machines, but of moral awakening. In parlours and lecture halls, debates raged over science and faith. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species challenged centuries of belief, igniting controversy and curiosity across the world. The Victorians found themselves standing between the old and the new, between faith and reason, tradition and transformation. Yet even amid doubt they pushed forward. For to be Victorian was to believe that nothing was beyond improvement, that every problem could be. The latter half of the 19th century saw Britain becoming not just an empire of land, but of ideas. Telegraph wires connected nations in seconds, newspapers carried knowledge to millions, and science began to redefine human potential. The Victorians believed they were building not only an empire, but a legacy, a future where reason and morality would guide mankind. Queen Victoria herself embodied that belief. Her reign became the thread that tied together decades of transformation. Through wars, reforms, and revolutions, she remained steadfast, a figure of continuity in a restless age. Her face appeared on coins, stamps, and statues across continents. She was not only the Queen of Britain, but the grandmother of Europe, the matriarch of a modern world. By the close of the century, Britain stood unmatched. Its navy guarded the seas, its industries powered half the planet, and its language, laws, and culture influenced nations far beyond its shores. Yet beneath the pride, cracks had begun to form. The weight of empire was immense, and the winds of change were already rising. The seeds of future wars, revolutions, and social upheaval had been planted. Still, when history looks back on the Victorian Age, it sees more than conquest or machinery. It sees an era that defined the modern world, a time when humanity dared to dream beyond its limits. The Victorians built cities, invented machines, and created systems that shaped our present. They taught us that greatness demands work, that progress comes with cost, and that vision must always be tempered by virtue. The Victorian Age was more than Britain's golden era. It was a turning point for all humanity. It was the moment when man learned not just to adapt to the world, but to transform it. From the thunder of trains to the hum of factories, from the elegance of palaces to the hardship of slums, this age was alive with ambition. It was flawed, fierce, and unforgettable, and though its empire has long faded, its spirit remains. In every invention, in every city skyline, in every act of human progress that dares to challenge the impossible. This was Britain's greatest age, the Victorian Age, when the world was remade by industry, guided by influence, and driven by an unshakable belief in the power of human will. The latter half of the 19th century saw Britain becoming not just an empire of land, but of ideas. Telegraph wires connected nations in seconds, newspapers carried knowledge to millions, and science began to redefine human potential. The Victorians believed they were building not only an empire, but a legacy, a future where reason and morality would guide mankind. Queen Victoria herself embodied that belief. Her reign became the thread that tied together decades of transformation. Through wars, reforms, and revolutions, she remained steadfast, a figure of continuity in a restless age. Her face appeared on coins, stamps, and statues across continents. She was not only the Queen of Britain, but the grandmother of Europe, the matriarch of a modern world. By the close of the century, Britain stood unmatched. Its navy guarded the seas, its industries powered half the planet, and its language, laws, and culture influenced nations far beyond its shores. Yet beneath the pride, cracks had begun to form. The weight of empire was immense, and the winds of change were already rising. The seeds of future wars, revolutions and social upheaval had been planted. Still, when history looks back on the Victorian Age, it sees more than conquest or machinery. It sees an era that defined the modern world, a time when humanity dared to dream beyond its limits. The Victorians built cities, invented machines, and created systems that shaped our present. They taught us that greatness demands work, that progress comes with cost, and that vision must always be tempered by virtue. The Victorian Age was more than Britain's golden era. It was a turning point for all humanity. It was the moment when man learned not just to adapt to the world, but to transform it. From the thunder of trains to the hum of factories, from the elegance of palaces to the hardship of slums, this age was alive with ambition. It was flawed, fierce, and unforgettable, and though its empire has long faded, its spirit remains. In every invention, in every city skyline, in every act of human progress that dares to challenge the impossible. This was Britain's greatest age, the Victorian Age, when the world was remade by industry, guided by influence, and driven by an unshakable belief in the power of human will. Every great empire reaches a moment when it must look in the mirror, when the gleam of progress is clouded by the smoke of its own ambition. For Victorian Britain, that moment came quietly, not with a single event, but through a growing awareness that the engines of progress were not without their cost. The world that had once celebrated invention and expansion began to ask deeper questions. Could industry exist without exploitation? Could power be maintained without conscience? Could an empire stand forever upon the backs of those it had subdued? As the 19th century marched forward, the confidence of the early Victorian years began to shift. The same machines that had built prosperity were now building disparity. Cities that once shone as symbols of progress became choked with poverty. Behind the grand facades of London and Manchester were narrow alleys filled with hunger and despair. The working class, the men, women and children who powered the empire's factories, began to rise in voice and spirit. The clatter of machines was now joined by the sound of protest. Reformers demanded change. Writers exposed the truth. Charles Dickens painted the harsh realities of the industrial world: children in rags, families living in filth, hope crushed beneath the weight of greed. His words echoed through Parliament and across the empire, awakening a conscience that had long been asleep. The Victorian dream had to evolve, or it would collapse under its own greatness. Education reform began to spread. The poor were given schools. Laws were passed to limit child labor and improve working conditions. The voices of women grew stronger, demanding the right to vote, to work, to be heard. These were not rebellions of violence, but revolutions of thought, proof that progress was more than invention. It was compassion made real. Beyond Britain's borders, the empire's vast reach began to feel its strain. India, Africa, and other colonies bore the burden of British dominance. The 1857 Indian Rebellion shook the empire's confidence. It was a brutal reminder that even the greatest power cannot rule without consequence. The Victorian belief in moral duty began to clash with the realities of colonial control. The British called it the white man's burden. But beneath those words lay guilt, uncertainty, and the dawning realization that no empire lasts forever. Meanwhile, science was changing the human mind. Charles Darwin's theories shattered old beliefs, forcing society to confront questions that faith could not answer easily. The Victorians, once certain of their place in the divine order, now faced a world that seemed far larger, older, and more complex than they had imagined. Progress had opened the doors of discovery, but it had also opened the floodgates of doubt. At home, technology continued to advance. The telegraph connected continents in seconds. Steamships shrank oceans, and trains reached every corner of the British Isles. But with speed came pressure, competition, exhaustion, disconnection. The machine that had once symbolized freedom began to feel like a cage. The human soul struggled to keep pace with the power it had unleashed. The Crystal Palace, once the proud emblem of human ingenuity, became a haunting reminder of ambition's impermanence when it burned to the ground in 1936, decades after its glory. But even before that flame, the fire of the Victorian dream had begun to dim. The optimism of the early age was giving way to reflection, even melancholy. The empire stood tall, but its foundations trembled beneath the weight of change. The Boer Wars in South Africa and conflicts across the colonies showed that maintaining control was costly, not just in money, but in moral clarity. The British people began to question not only the empire's reach, but its right. The Victorian Age, once the symbol of confidence, became an era wrestling with conscience. Yet, within this struggle lay the true strength of the age. The turning point was not its downfall, it was its awakening. The Victorians learned that power must be guided by principle, that industry must serve humanity, not consume it. Reformers like William Wilberforce, Florence Nightingale, and Josephine Butler embodied this new spirit. They reminded the empire that greatness was not measured by dominion, but by dignity. The moral compass of the Victorian Age began to realign. Religion, philosophy, and science all collided, giving birth to new ways of seeing the world. The age of certainty gave way to the age of questioning, but from that questioning came evolution. Art grew darker, literature more introspective, architecture more symbolic. The world was changing, and so was Britain. Queen Victoria herself felt the weight of this transformation. The young queen who had once ruled with unshakable optimism grew into a woman marked by loss and reflection. The death of Prince Albert in 1861 shattered her spirit. For years she withdrew from public life, her mourning becoming a symbol of an empire that too had lost its innocence. Yet even in grief she endured, and so did the nation she represented. Her resilience mirrored Britain's own. Wounded but unbroken, the late Victorian period became an era of paradox. Industrial might paired with social conscience, imperial pride alongside growing humility. The empire's flags still waved across the globe, but the hearts of its people we. The Victorian Age, an era of invention and empire, of ambition and awakening, did not simply end when Queen Victoria's reign came to a close in 1901. It faded like the last light of a setting sun, leaving behind a world forever changed. What began as the dream of a nation became the blueprint for modern civilization. The factories, the railways, the science, the schools, the ideals, all were the bricks and beams of a new world order. Britain had taken the tools of the Industrial Revolution and forged them into something greater than empire, progress itself. When Queen Victoria passed away, millions across continents mourned her, not just as a monarch, but as a symbol of an age that had defined human possibility. Her reign had seen the world transformed from candlelight to electricity, from carriages to railways, from isolation to global connection. The Victorian Age had taken the first great leap into modernity, yet even in its end, it whispered a warning. For every triumph of industry, there was the shadow of inequality. For every victory of empire, there was the cost of conquest. The age had proven that progress without purpose is blind, and power without conscience is brittle, but the legacy it left behind was not one of machines or empires, it was one of mindset. The Victorians taught the world that greatness is not inherited, it is built. That knowledge, discipline, and perseverance could lift nations and individuals alike from darkness into destiny. Their hands built the world we stand on, our cities, our systems, our science, our sense of order. The very rhythm of modern life still echoes the pulse of the Victorian heart. Every engine that roars, every bridge that stands, every idea that seeks to make the impossible possible, All are descendants of that relentless spirit. The Victorian Age believed in effort. It believed in progress. It believed that the human will, sharpened by purpose, could move mountains. And it did. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the Victorians lies not in what they built, but in what they learned. They discovered that humanity's true power is not found in machines, but in morality. That an empire without empathy cannot endure. That no invention, however grand, can replace the value of human dignity. As the 20th century dawned, the empire's edges began to blur. The world it had shaped started to reshape itself. Colonies sought freedom, technology leapt forward, and war would soon test every ideal the Victorians had cherished. Yet even in the chaos that followed, their influence remained, like the steel in a city's bones, unseen but unbreakable. We live today in the shadow and the light of that age. The railways they built still run. The institutions they founded still govern. The philosophies they debated still shape our laws, our literature, and our lives. Their echoes are everywhere, in the hum of our cities, the code of our machines, the dreams of our generation. But their greatest lesson is one we must never forget, that progress is not a destination, it is a responsibility. That every invention must serve humanity, not enslave it. That the measure of greatness is not how much power we hold, but how wisely we use it. The Victorian Age began with steam and ambition, but it ended with reflection and revelation. It taught the world that strength is not just the power to build, but the courage to question, to look beyond comfort, beyond conquest, beyond the illusion of perfection. In their triumphs, we see the heights we can reach. In their mistakes, we see the dangers we must avoid. Together they form the map of modern humanity, a reminder that every age, no matter how glorious, is merely a step in a longer journey toward truth and understanding. As the final years of Queen Victoria's reign gave way to the modern world, Britain stood on the threshold of a new century, one it had helped create but could no longer control. The empire's glory would fade, but its ideas would live on. Industry, education, science, morality, and the unshakable belief that progress is possible, and that perhaps is the most powerful legacy of all, that an age of iron and smoke could teach us something eternal, that human greatness is not forged by machines, but by the fire of purpose within the soul. The Victorian Age ended, but its spirit never died. It lives in every dream that dares to build, in every mind that dares to question, and in every heart that refuses to give up. From the roar of engines to the quiet strength of ideas, from the power of empire to the pursuit of empathy. This was more than a chapter of history. It was a transformation of humanity itself. And so, as we look back upon that extraordinary century, its glory and its guilt, its brilliance and its burden, we see not just the story of Britain, but the story of all humankind, our eternal struggle to balance progress with purpose, invention with integrity, power with peace. For this was not merely the age when Britain ruled the world, it was the age when humanity learned to rule itself. The Victorian Age, born of steam. Driven by will, remembered for its power, revered for its lessons, an era that built the modern world and proved for all time that even from the darkest coal and the heaviest iron, the brightest light of human progress can emerge.